I was mid-roll in a training exercise, teaching a couple of rookie SWAT officers how to breach a building without getting their heads blown off when my phone buzzed. Emotion alert. My house is a mess of cameras, a habit from years in the field, and a healthy distrust of porch pirates. I tapped the live feed and nearly dropped the rubber training knife I was holding. A flashlight beam swept across my living room wall. Someone was inside my house. At first, I assumed a burglar, then the camera panned and I saw a man in cargo pants and a cheap khaki vest that read "Neighborhood Safety." Two more followed, a fishing hat guy and a woman with a walkie clipped to her fanny pack. My stomach knotted. This was Karen's patrol, the HOA dictator with laminated badges, Velcro name patches, and a taste for other people's business. Let me back up. I'm Luke. I trained SWAT teams, federal units, and private contractors for 15 years, then retired to a quiet house with dogs and motion sensors. The neighborhood looked pleasant on paper picket fences, newsletters about hedge heights until Karen moved from community volunteer to petty autocrat. She printed uniforms, issued clipboards, and encouraged neighbors to report suspicious activity, which meant anything from late trash bins to blackout blinds. When she started leaving pink slips on my door demanding a voluntary safety inspection, I rolled my eyes. I told her I worked with law enforcement. She shrugged and called me some kind of security guard. The night before the break-in, I caught her measuring my driveway. I told her to leave. She smiled like a villain and kept going. So when the camera showed them in my living room, I cut training, told my students it was a real-world demo, and drove home. I called dispatch on the way, deliberately keeping details spare so the response was clean, and arrived in 6 minutes. Parked down the block, came up through the back gate, slipped in through the garage. Quiet, boring, professional. Inside, Karen and her crew were arguing over whether to cut my shed lock. Someone had bolt cutters. I cut the lights, called out in a calm drill voice, "You are trespassing. Put down your tools, exit the premises, and lie on the ground." Panic is loud. Kyle, Karen's son, who thought Call of Duty made him tactical, lunged for the hallway and ran straight into the strobe I hit from my training rig. He crumpled. The others scrambled, and I walked them down, flashlight in faces one by one. 10 minutes later, the real cops painted my driveway in blue and red. Officers I'd trained arrived with professional restraint and, frankly, some amusement. Karen tried to spin it as a wellness check, accused me of being the suspicious one. The officer watched the footage and asked, "Did you have permission to enter?" She did not. Her empire of clipboards started to wobble, and then the twist. Left on my coffee table, a cheap binder. It looked like nothing until I opened it. Photos taken from porches, time-stamped notes, leaves, house 6:45 a.m. Daily. Why so early? Lists of high-risk homes, surveillance notes, and printed emails, encouraging volunteers to document neighbors. It wasn't civic duty. It was unlicensed surveillance and harassment. Karen's operation was bigger than a backyard power trip. That binder was the smoking gun. I should tell you, this felt personal because it was my house is where I sleep, where my dogs snore on the rug, where I keep the gear I've collected over years of work, not a stage for other people's fantasies. When I walked through that dark kitchen and saw a bolt cutter on the counter, I imagined all the little violations, drawers rifled through, private boxes, opened the mundane intimacy of someone believing they have a right to dig through your life. The sound of the walkie's static, the faint chuckle of someone taking their role far too seriously, all of it sat wrong in my chest. Enter Evan, a federal friend I hadn't expected. He arrived the next day, suit badge, that half grin that means he's already started compiling questions. We went through the binder, the emails, the invoices for printed patches. If she used HOA funds or involved officials, he said that's a different level. That phrase turned neighborhood gossip into a civic problem. We quietly built a file labeled "Evidence Copies Delivered to City Officials" and a local reporter who eats neighborhood drama for breakfast. What surprised me was how quickly neighbors who'd been quiet came forward. People told small stories that, stitched together, became a pattern. A teen followed home for wearing a hoodie, a woman threatened over a lawn gnome, a librarian who'd been warned about her wind chimes. Someone had actually written down an elderly neighbor's oxygen routine like it was data. Those moments linked formed something ugly, a system of monitoring and intimidation dressed up as community safety. The HOA tried to circle the wagons with an emergency meeting. The link leaked. Karen tried every dodge, edited footage, misunderstandings, even blaming digital actors. Then Judith retired Navy JAG, and the one person who refused to be browbeaten took a flash drive. I handed her, plugged it into the projector, and let the audio play. There it was, Karen's voice loud and clear. "Cut the lock." A former cop in the back ran the audio through forensic software and confirmed authenticity. The motions to remove her as chair and to disband the task force passed almost immediately. Karen called a press conference on her lawn afterward. Megaphone 3 confused neighbors. One dog and its comic effect couldn't hide the legal work that followed. City officials opened inquiries into impersonation of authority, unlawful entry, and misuse of HOA funds. The process wasn't instantaneous, but it was thorough fines. A decade ban from holding HOA office required community ethics training and a formal apology order. For someone who thrived on petty control, the civic penalties cut exactly where it hurts. The healing was incremental. We replaced snide flyers with a real meeting about legitimate safety policies. I helped neighbors learn how to document incidents, who to call, and how to escalate without making things worse. The lanky teenager from Karen's patrol, the kid who'd sneaked through my house with sunglasses and a walkie, showed up at a backyard training session a week later. He looked awkward and contrite. I made him help repair the gate his group had bent, made him read that binder and the civic ruling, and then he sweated through a shift of honest labor. By the time he left, I think he understood the difference between cosplay authority and real responsibility. The public hearing months later was packed. Neighbors in polos, sun hats, even t-shirts, making a joke of the chaos, and when it was my turn to speak, I laid out facts. Motion alert, live feed, bolt cutters, binder. No drama, just sequence. The ruling landed violations for impersonation and unlawful entry, substantial fines, and restrictions that stripped the fake task force of legitimacy. It wasn't the cinematic knockout you see in movies, but it was real, and it removed her power. There's a final, small image I keep: Karen standing on my porch. A few weeks later, alone, no clipboard, no sunglasses, handing me an envelope. Inside, a lawyer-drafted letter of regret, and in the margins, 3 straight words in her handwriting: "I was wrong." No confetti, no heartfelt confession, just a tiny admission that closed a chapter. If there's a moral here, it isn't tidy authority without accountability becomes abuse. And a community that confuses paperwork for power will eventually eat itself. Justice in this case was paperwork patience and neighbors deciding they'd had enough. Not a headline, but a neighborhood that slowly stopped looking over its shoulder. So what would you do if you saw a self-styled patrol in your living room? Is community safety ever a defense for breaking the law? Drop a comment. Tell me your Karen stories, tell me how you handled it. And if this landed for you, share it. Because sometimes the loudest lesson is a neighbor who kept the footage and refused to let a little empire stand.